Bjarga svinnar vjar min blótaþer, astal helgum stað, egis vahat forað, kemur at hóða sonum, virnte úr náðum nimma. Bjarga, wisdom, do we give to those men who bloat to them at the stali stead. So high danger cannot face the sons of men, they remove each from the needs. Welcome to the Sacred Stew. I am your host, James, and this is my co-host, Anthony. And this weekend, as promised in last week's episode, we are going to touch up on the Hausta Blot and the festivities for this time of year. There's a couple things that I want to talk about before we get to those things. But before we get to any of that, I want to thank everyone for listening to our episodes. Our channels and podcast has been growing over the weeks, and we appreciate all the shares, the likes, and the follows. And if this is your first time tuning in, you can follow us on anchor.fm and 5 different podcast platforms, the most notable of which is Spotify. We're also on YouTube and Telegram. You can find us in those 3 channels. So without much ado, I want to say hi to my co-host, Anthony. Anthony, how is it going today?
Oh, living the dream, man. Just hanging out. Didn't have much to do today. Really got to just kick back and relax. And on a weekend, that's rare. It seems like even on my weekends, I'm always having to run around and do something.
Yeah, no, I know the feeling. I work myself, and through the weekdays, I wake up at 5 in the morning. I don't even get home from work until about 6 in the evening. And then on weekends, as you mentioned, often out doing things because that's our only free time to go do things. And I did the same as you. I rested today mostly.
We got 2 weeks before Hausta Blot.
2 weeks before Hausta Blot, yes. Yes, sir. I'm excited for it. You didn't partake in the bloat with us last year, but it was a really powerful bloat, and I'll get into some of the things that happened during that bloat that we'll share later in the episode when we start getting into that. But I am, starting to make preparations for that date. We'll have a feast as always, and have good folk come join us in our circle for this seasonal bloat. I know you're coming to it, right?
Yeah, both of us will be there.
Nice. I'm glad to hear that. How is your significant other? I don't know if you want to use her name or not, but how is she with the religion? How is she absorbing the information?
I would say little bit by little bit. Like she was like, I wouldn't say it's so much right now. She's not so much into the religion necessarily, as in learning about the folk ways. Like she was asking about if we did a marriage ceremony and we had property, could we wrap that all into like one big ritual? And I'm like, well, that would technically be a hand fasting ceremony and a land taking ceremony. They could be done back to back, but they are 2 separate things. And then I guess her mom, she either told her mom about our podcast or had her mom listen to one of the episodes. I'm going to have to ask her to double check, because I guess they wound up having a conversation and she explained to her the little bit that she knows about it. So, I mean, that's pretty big. That's a pretty big step from where I'm standing. And, we've been together 2.5 years now almost. And, it's just kind of getting to this point, but I definitely feel like her meeting you and your significant other and everybody else has really made her more comfortable in that.
That's good to hear. It can be challenging whenever one person's on a specific path and the other person is not on the exact same path. But with all things, I believe that the truth of our faith and our religion for our folk reveals itself to a person that is exposed to it. I think people naturally see it and they incline towards it because they understand it. It resonates with them. And even though she may not strictly practice the faith yet, she's an important aspect of it because she is, a descendant of our great people and our great tribes, and she makes she's probably your better half, you'd probably say, right?
Look, whether I'm her better half or she's my better half is strictly dependent on who's asking and the circumstances behind the question. We balance each other out pretty well.
Okay, fair enough, fair enough. But she's an integral part of you, and you're a part of the kindred and the tribe at large. So even though she may not totally embrace the faith as of yet, she still impacts everything that we do together. So it's good to hear.
And what's super funny is that mutual friend of all of ours, really, but the wedding, her friend that got married at All Thing, that was, I told you about that whole thing. And she had tried to talk to my significant other about the relationship while they were going through their thing. And then she winds up with me after they separate. So I told her, it's like, well, that's a sign. Like you had two people at important points in your life come through following this path that should give you a big, like, it's like a neon sign in the dark. Like, this is where you need to be.
Right. And actually, that gets to another thing that I wanted to address in this conversation about fate. About those serendipitous moments like that where we see that there's signs and symbols and stuff. And I don't want to get too much into it because I do want to make sure that I have a significant portion of this episode that's dedicated to the bloats, like we've been speaking about in the last couple episodes of doing a show on. But I think that's an important conversation to have because somebody raised some questions about what is fate within the Germanic worldview. He was posing these questions. I'm sure you saw them and heard them in the chat that we're in after our last episode. And essentially commenting off of one of my comments in the last episode. And if you haven't checked it out, it's a really great episode. It's called Loki's Influence in the World. But the comment that he was responding to was my comment about, the ability to change one's fate. Real quick, though, before we actually get into that subject, I want to raise a horn here to my brother and kinsman, Kaya, and his family. They have a new daughter that has been brought into this world, and her name is Sophia, and she's a great added member to our tribe now, and I want to hail him and his family and wish the best of luck to little Sophia out there. So if you're listening, Kaya, we miss you, and hopefully we'll see you here in the next week or two. Whew. All right. So responding to those comments in that channel, that chat that we're in, you want to kind of summarize the question or the arguments that were presented there for our listeners?
So to keep it simple, there were some people that were saying that their position is Wyrd and Urlag are the same thing. There's no differences. There's some people that were saying they are similar but different. in certain respects. There were some people that were arguing from a strictly predetermined, fatalistic approach on everything. And then there were a couple of other people that it was a little bit more of a, to use a basic analogy, a choose your own adventure story where there are big points in your life that are going to happen a specific way, but there are smaller choices you can, that your quote unquote free will comes in, that can tune the frequency of those events one way or another. Now, that's personally the camp that I fall into, and I look at Wyrd as the overall web connecting generations, connecting everybody in the circle, everybody in the world. And those are the big things that we cannot change. And when we are making decisions that are interacting on that level, our choices are pretty much predetermined. What we're going to do has already been written. But I personally look at Urlag as the little individual threads that we are in that web, and we have a little bit more apparent choice, but not, I would say 99.99% of people, those choices that they have, it's like you're walking through a haunted house and you come up to a stage and there's 3 doors and you have to pick one door to go through, and there's no turning back once you do. Those 3 doors are going to be slightly different, one better, one worse, one more the same. But once you get to the end of the house, there's still only one exit. So that's my position, and that's the base of that's kind of a basic summation of the discussion we were having with other people in the Telegram chat.
Right. And there is 2 camps on it, as you mentioned. One who believe in absolute free will, one who believes in just a determinist theology or eschatology to it, where everything is preordained. But there's some of us that are in the middle there. Like, from what you explained, I would take that you're kind of that middle of the road view of it, right?
Yeah, I have definitely, for me, a lot of things make more sense when you stand in the bit of gray between the black and white of either side. So that's always where I start with anything.
Right. So this is a very complicated subject to break down in just a short amount of time that we have, but especially since we want to jam the Hausta Blot and such into that. But so I look at Wyrd as an Urlag as something that's intrinsic in the entire universe, in the way that events happen and the reason why things happen. And I see the creation myth that we've talked about in season 1 as being a way to view how these things operate in our lives, in the universe in totality. We spoke about Urd's well, Mimir's well, and Vergelmer, and how these things essentially flowed into Genunga Gap to create the life force and give nourishment to the seed of Yggdrasil as it grew. And I look at this as fate itself, and how the web is weaved. And Wyrd itself being Urd, is a weaver of this, as well as verdandi, the present. It's woven into the fabric by the past that has happened. And then the future is also created. So there's this kind of a mixed concept in Germanic theology where all of these things exist in a single moment that we're in right now. Yet it's all each unique and individual. But Urd is a weaver of this web. And Urlag is essentially the natural law, the originating law of that everything has to follow throughout the universe. So think of it as like cause and effect. If you do this, this will happen. Now, I know in much of our literature and lore, it speaks about the Norns weaving the fate of the men like the stars in the heavens. But it's not as exactly like that. Yes, great points in time and history and in the future as well that will come are certainly fated to happen. But our concept as a Germanic people didn't look at fate as necessarily something that was totally set in stone for the individual. That there's many possibilities and many outcomes that can happen. I heard one of the best descriptions of how this works was given by Dan Camp in his podcast, The Fergan, where he references a story about a young boy that lived 1,200 years ago or so, and this young boy, just his whole life dream was to become a great warrior for the king. And he grew up with these dreams and ambitions, became a teenager, practiced the art of fighting and swords and archery, and he became the best at what he did. And when he became of age, he enlisted as one of the king's warriors. And he becomes a great warrior, wins many battles, and is noticed by the king and raises in rank to eventually become the king's personal bodyguard. And many would say, well, this was his fate. This was his fate. And yes, it was indeed his fate to become that great warrior and his station in life. But life always throws us other options as well. And this explanation that Dan Cap gave, he uses the example of, well, what if a foreign hostile king were to go to this great warrior and essentially bribe him with all the wealths and treasures and lands that any man could ever want. And all he would have to do is betray the king that he had grew up serving and serving loyally. And so the boy, the warrior, would be faced with a choice. He could remain loyal to his king, keep his honor to his king that he's devoted himself to, or at that point in his life, he could sell everything that he had essentially built his life to for all the glories and riches that any man could ever desire. He could choose to do that. He could choose to sell out everything. But if this man does this, his worth, his value automatically becomes nothing. For now he is known not to be loyal. He is now known to not have honor. And thus his worth or his value has deplenished. And even the king that bribed him would know these things to be true of this man and would never trust him, for he could do the same thing to him. Now, these are choices that obviously are using very extreme examples of here of choices in life and the way that Wyrd works. But each of us in our lives come to certain points where we have similar dilemmas that would test our honor and our character. Or maybe it's even more mundane than that. It could be just silly decisions that we have to make in our life. Yet, We have to choose a course, obviously, in what we decide, and there's always consequences, whether they're good or they're bad, for the choices that we make. Now, there are certainly some things that are predetermined and fated that none of us can control. None of us can control who our parents are. None of us can control where we are born at. None of us can control as a child at least, the environment around us that we are raised in. However, we do reach a point in our lives where we are able to take care of ourselves. And by tradition, this was usually done through rites of passage, where young children, men and women, were given the knowledge that they would need in order to make survival and life decisions. The spiritual and religious aspect of everything was central to all of the decisions made, to our ancestors. Yet some did find that their hearts became corrupt. I want to share a story, actually, from my own personal life to give examples of how Wyrd works. And I hope that my example will touch both the greater topic tonight of Hausta Blot and its importance, but also an example of just the way that fate works. Because fate may push us in a certain way, but fate, as our ancestors understood it, and as is our cosmological belief, we do have decisions to make in our lives. So I want to give two examples. A year ago, almost in a couple weeks from now, we held Hausta Blot at my home. It was a very powerful blot. We gave offering, and we all left feeling like what we were doing or what we had done was very healing and connective to our gods. And during the blot, one of the members that was here with us, I have each participant come up and give an offering. And the offering that was given by one of the members, he had debated in his mind before he actually got up and gave his offering of what he should give. And he ended up just grabbing some apples and giving these apples as an offering. However, in his mind, he was thinking that he should give this necklace that he had on as an offering. And we go through the procession, and then we get back. After the ritual is over, we come back to the area where we're going to hold the symbol. And as we're talking to each other after the symbol, we're reflecting, and something happens where his necklace breaks. And he's like, wow, man, that's really crazy that necklace breaks. And he was praying for fertility when he had given his offering earlier, and he had thought about giving this really beautiful necklace as the offering. But that necklace broke afterwards. And he told us about his thoughts during the ritual about that, and how it's really strange how this necklace broke at that point. So it was kind of a sign for him that he should have gave that necklace. Now, I want to mention that blot was so powerful, actually, that just a couple months later, almost every woman that had attended that blot became pregnant. So our tribe is expanding. We have, I think, a total of 12 babies coming into the tribe. But after this, I had ended up getting a job at a local place within a half hour where I live. And it was a pretty tough job. It was a 3-on, 3-off type of deal where you work 3 days, 12-hour shifts, and then you're off for 3 days. Paid good money. I haven't done, that type of work in many, many years. I had been running my own business for essentially the last 10 years, which kind of took a decline during the whole COVID scamdemic that we all went through. And so to be responsible and take care of my family, I went back out into the workforce. And I got this job, and I really didn't like it that much. And it's so strange, when I was doing that job, I ended up getting a little talc in my eye, and the job had chemicals and other caustic things at their plant, and I ended up, because it's my first 90 days, they ended up just letting me go just because of what they quote as a safety incident, because I wasn't wearing goggles at the time I was handling this 5,000-pound bag of talc. And I was really devastated by it, because I have never lost a job before. I've never been fired before in my life. And it was kind of wearing on me, and I was kind of depressed for a couple months. Well, a month and a half or so. But about a month later, after this, I get contacted just randomly by this company, and they had seen my resume somewhere, and they wanted to talk to me. So they bring me down to their office, and we're talking, and they're looking for somebody that's really seasoned in marketing and sales. And I have experience managing call centers and things of that sort, and marketing websites and businesses and such, and we really hit it off. This place paid me not just a really good wage hourly, but they gave me a really nice incentive sign-up bonus. And this is a really good job. It's family-owned business, and everybody there's pretty, I would say, ethnically conscious, and their worldview in the sense of politics was common with my own for the most part. And the job's been a great blessing. Within the months, I became the number one sales rep that company's had. It's been around for 12 years. I'm in the course of about to make, I think, close to $2 million in sales this year. So it's something that just happened to me. And the job I got fired from, I had actually gotten that job before we had done Hausta Blot, and it was just kind of taking a job because I'm like, okay, I got to take something that pays decent and I can get out there and do this. And reflecting upon everything that happened, I see the hands of Urd and fate weaving itself, in the sense of that I make this decision to go get this job, then I perform a blot that's specifically to help against poverty, that I lose this job that I really didn't want, not by really any conscious decision of my own or lack of good work ethic. And then almost immediately I'm given something even better, something that's more my niche of work, something I've been doing mostly since 2007. That's how much experience that I have in this field of sales and marketing. So that's one example of how I see how fate works itself. The second example in the course of this year that I'd like to use is a little bit more mundane than that. But when the gas prices started increasing, and I was really hurting because I had a really nice Ford pickup truck. You saw my truck before, Anthony. It was pretty souped up, I'd say. Wouldn't you say?
It was a nice truck.
Had flare fenders, the Bajas. It had it was lifted, had 35s. I mean, this truck was mean. It was built for off-road racing. I purchased this truck from a place that builds off-road racing trucks. So it was souped up. But when the gas was raising, this was my vehicle. This is my transportation to my job. And I have to drive about 45 minutes to go to this job. And I was like, wow, this is insane. I'm spending close to $35 a day because this truck got horrible gas mileage. And I'm just like, wow, I don't want to do this no more. And I just kept thinking, okay, I'm going to buy a new car. I'm going to get a new car. I keep saying that. Gas prices keep going up higher and higher and higher. Finally, they get above $5. I still hadn't bought my new car. I was just kind of procrastinating because I'm at work all day long. And finally, in July, just a couple months ago, I ended up getting a wreck in my truck. And the wreck, although it's technically was my fault, I guess legally from a sense of I hit somebody in the side of their vehicle, the circumstances of it are really a little bit more than that because I live up on a giant hill, as you know, Anthony, and everybody, well, not everybody listening to this knows. It's considered, I guess, technically a mountain by name. But in order to get down to the highway to go to work, I have to go down this huge hill. It's about 7 miles. And at the bottom of it, there's a stop sign, then the main road. So it's like a T intersection. And to my left is south and to my right is north. And when I look to my left, the road is curved. And I didn't know this at the time, but there's actually a blind spot in that. And I get there and I look for a car. I don't see any vehicles. I look to my right, don't see a vehicle. Everything's in the clear. And then I start to pull out. And when I pull out, there's a car right there in front of me. I didn't even see it until it was right there in front of me. And my truck is totaled. So now I may have been fated to be in that accident. Obviously it happened. That's woven in the web. But when I critically think about this in retrospect, I think about how I delayed making a decision to get a new vehicle. And I went that same day, my truck was wrecked, and bought a new vehicle. So I see this as a good example, mundane example of where, you know, fate is going to push you to where you're supposed to be at in a certain way. But those little decisions you make throughout can become something of its own as well. So I could have made the decision to buy a vehicle and had that. Then the question comes, well, would I have ever wrecked? We would never know, obviously, the answer to that. But I kept putting off this decision over and over and over and over again. And finally, fate pushed me to get that new vehicle, like I was suggesting. What do you think about that?
I think that what you said has a certain amount of truth that, and this kind of can go back to that 3-door analogy. Going to use you in the car as an example. If you would have made the time to buy another car, you might still have the truck. But by you procrastinating, to use your truck as an example, going back to, this isn't going to be a 3-door option, but let's just say it's a 2-door option. If you would have made the time and gotten a new car before this accident, you would still have your very nice truck. But your truck was not going to be a good financial option because of the prices for gas. So because you did not make that decision beforehand, it's a super mundane example, but they stepped in and got rid of the truck and forced you to have to get a new car. And as much of a mundane example as that is, I think this shows why there is a little bit of free will and a little bit of predeterminism when it comes to the concepts of Wyrd and Urlag. Because we can either make the decision to swim with the river of Wyrd and Urlag, or we can try to fight against it and bump our heads getting swept downstream where we're going to go anyway.
Right, right. No, that's a really good way of viewing that. And the thing is though, is it gets even deeper than that, though, Anthony. The the choices that could be made, and this is the point that I actually wanted to make with this, is that you claim your fate. You claim your fate. Yes, there is a certain amount of limitations, and there are certain things that if, Urlag so determines that the path is going a certain way, it's going to go that way. But when my vehicle was wrecked, I could have just not got another vehicle. I could have just said, oh, woe is me. I don't have a vehicle. I cannot make it to work. Therefore, I don't have an income. Therefore, I can't take care of my family. Therefore, we are now poverty stricken. Right? That could have been a decision that I made. But I didn't make that decision. There are a lot of people that are in a situation where they wouldn't be able to afford to go get a new vehicle. And so this ties into a lot of concepts, because everything that I've built my life for, I was only able to go get a new vehicle and make that decision because of past decisions that I've made. And this is the way that fate works. And it weaves together with the decisions our ancestors made 50, 100, 1,000 years ago. All of that is woven into the very moments that we're living today. And in order for us to really realize what our fate is, we have to, and I hate going to the Latin version of it, because what I'm describing isn't exactly how fate is understood by the Roman/Greek theologies, but carpe diem, seize the day. Take a hold of your fate and make it what it can become. You can make decisions for things that make you a great person of value, proving your worth, or you can make decisions that essentially cause you to be poverty stricken. Now, there are some people, and this ties into Urlag, because when we're talking about Urlag, we're also talking about luck. That's where the word luck comes from. Luck comes from that exact same word, law. And it's so ingrained in our folks' life that even though we have been brainwashed for the past 1,000 years by Christianity and the whole Christian worldview, that even to this day, people still say good luck. They still say that word. Now, I would argue that one's luck when you're born is obviously your Urlag, it's your fate, but that you can change your luck through various means. You can change that luck by seeking assistance of your families, your friends. You can change your luck by connecting to your ancestors. You can change your luck by connecting with the gods. And with that statement, I want to tie this all together to Hausta Blot. How do you think I'm going to tie this together with Hausta Blot, Anthony?
That it is through bloat that we reach out to our gods and ancestors, and when we're reaching to the gods, we're asking for their help to remove the needs that are shackling us to misfortune and poverty.
Exactly. So bloat is the most sacred observance in our religion. It's the principal component of what makes us who we are. in relation to our gods. And that is actually one of the reasons why it's important for us to examine bloat and what it is and why we do it. Because there's many people out there that just perform they have bloats to everything. And they go through these motions and they say words and they do things, but there's no real meaning behind it. And for a long time, it really wasn't understood. What exactly are we bloating to? Are we just bloating to honor? Are we just bloating to do this? But there's actually something much deeper to it than what most people realize. It was the Noriana Society that kind of enlightened us to what bloat is about. And they had noticed that there were a few rune stones that existed in Europe that made reference to what they called 9 needs. And you recognize that the word need is the same word for the rune Nalvis, the need. And so noticing that in those 3 inscriptions that were found, it had noted that there were 9 needs that were to essentially be protected from. These 9 needs were dissected by the Noriana Society and examined, and they were the ones that actually published this in their recent book, The Eifenruner. And what these 9 needs were, they correlated and connected with very specific bloats that are done throughout the year. These bloats were 9 in number. They correlated to 3 festivals. We are commanded by Odin himself in the Ynglinga saga to perform these bloats, actually. And he names them the three bloats to be done. And each bloat, the festivals, 3 festivals a year. And at these festivals, there are 3 days, and in each day, there is a specific bloat that is done in the course of that day for that festival. Each bloat corresponds to a specific need that we need to be protected from. So in a few episodes ago, we did on deicide and the sacred bloat ritual. We told about the story about Svitdag and Hadding and how essentially Hadding had committed deicide, or he had murdered Freya's husband. And she unleashed the protection of the gods, giving the Jotun free reign to cause whatever ill to us. And that at that time we're commanded to give bloat to the gods for the protection or the help against these needs. The Noriana Society coined the terms of the Bjarga, the help, and the Nauth, the need. The 9 needs begin with how the Germanic folks saw the coming of the new year. So I know for the last several centuries, we celebrate the new year on New Year's Eve, December 31st into January 1st. And that's considered the start of a new year by the current calendar system that we go by. However, traditionally, our folk have always observed the new year beginning essentially at the end of the fall when the winter season began. This was done essentially around the end of October, which is pretty cool because there's already kind of a tradition that survived in mainly America, but some other parts of Europe as well. The tradition of Hallows Eve or Halloween, which many authors and scholars have connected to Samhain, which was described as being, when the veil is thinnest and you're able to connect with your ancestors. And our bloat, we have been able to map out to being around this exact same time and serves similar functions in a way. So the 9 needs during this time of the year, in this season, that we are essentially seeking the aid or the help of the gods from, is poverty, infertility, and illness or sickness, from coming over us. And there's very specific gods that are the host gods of those bloats that you essentially bloat to for various protections. In this season, what we call Veternator is the Hausta Blot, the Alfar Blot, and the Desir Blot. The Hausta Blot is a bloat to Frere that we do, and we are seeking his help against poverty. Frere is also known as the Elf King. He was giving Elfheim as a tooth gift by the Aesir and the Vanir, and he is essentially the overseer of the elves. The second blow in the Veternator rituals is the Alfar Blot. And this bloat is done with gifts given to the Alfar to help protect us from sickness that the Jotun may cause to our bodies and to our folk as a whole, a plague, if you will. And the Disa Blot, the Desir Blot, is done to Freya and the Desir. Freya is the host goddess for this bloat, and this is for fertility. Her help is with the fertility. Now, Frey, traditionally in the past during this bloat, there would be two idols that were driven in a wagon around the area for the procession of the bloat, and it would be an idol of Freyr and an idol of Freya. And it's pretty common in most of the bloats that there was always the male or the masculine essence of the bloat. For example, like Odin, and then Frigga in contrast. So during this bloat, there would be a procession of the entrance of the gods or the goddesses. So to give a little bit of a description about how, or the way that this bloat is done, there is a sacred stew that is made, contains a boar. And the boar is known for its fertility and is also part of the offering that we give for Hausta Blot. So Hausta Blot, Hausta itself means autumn. It's like the autumn bloat. So when you say Hausta Blot, you're saying the autumn bloat. And that is Frere's bloat. That is to Frere himself. One thing I find interesting about the coordination of these bloats is where you have Frere's bloat, then Freya's bloat, and then the Alfar Blot in that succession. And Frere essentially is the opening bloat. So from an esoteric perspective, I've thought about, why this sequence of bloats in this order. And it makes sense that you essentially are going to Frere first to seek, the prosperity that will come, so you don't have the poverty, and that these next bloats are the manifestation of his blessings that he's granted. Essentially, he's like the king that says, allow this person or this group to be blessed, to the Desir and to the Alfar. Does that make sense?
Yeah, like you give the like you said, you give the offerings to Freyr, and if and when he accepts them, then he gives his biargum, and it's okay. Give these people what they need. Give those people what they need. Those people didn't give anything. Let's let them figure it out.
Right. Yeah. And so one thing I would like to bring up, because I know that there's lots of groups or families or even individuals out there that may do bloats in different fashions or different ways. that one thing that we know that our ancestors did. Now, before I get to this part, let me say, as I mentioned in the episode with deicide and the sacred bloat ritual, the there are communal bloats, and then there's also personal bloats. So I am talking about communal bloats for the community that are there to help the community. And so this is important to understand because one thing that I've noticed and other people notice too is that a lot of times when people are hosting bloats and having people over or they're meeting somewhere, people just show up. They just come. And our ancestors, when they would go to these vislas, these festivals that were over a 3-day period, people would come with offerings for the gods themselves that they would give. And this is a tradition I think we need to start really pushing upon people, that when you go to bloat, you should come with something for the gods. You should come with something to give as an offering yourself. It makes the offering to that God much more powerful. And here in the Wolf Pack, we've been starting to do this over the last 1.5 2 years or so, where we've slowly been introducing these new elements to the communal bloats, where more than just the host of the bloat is actually giving offerings. So in the Hausta Blot last year, which was very powerful, the way that we performed it, for the offering and the giving itself, we had dug into the earth a hole. Everybody took a turn taking some of the earth out, and then each person gave an offering into that hole one by one. And then the hole was slowly closed up, and prayers and chants were sung, and then the runes were read to see if the offering was accepted, and the blessing of the folk then commenced after that. So that's kind of a really brief description of how it happened. But I just wanted to share that with other people because we saw over that course of that year, me personally and other people as well that were participants in that bloat, success in their lives, children coming over, just the next couple months where the women were getting pregnant. People were getting better jobs, better raises. I can point at several people within the Wolf Pack that were a part of that ritual, in their lives were impacted for the better over the course of the next year. Anything to throw in there, Anthony?
I mean, on the same vein, I can't speak for Hausta Blot, but I know when very shortly after I went to your Thor Blot, a lot of very interesting things happened in my life. A lot of things that I didn't see, I started to see, and so I just kind of attribute that to the power of that blow. So it's different, but on the same vein, when the communal ones are done in a specific way, the effects that these veslas and bloats have are very apparent, and you don't have to look very hard to find the influence.
Right. Now, some people may say, well, hey, my life's great. I don't do bloat. Now, what do you got to say about that?
I mean, cheesecake without caramel is good, but if bloat's going to put caramel on that cheesecake, why wouldn't you?
That's
I'm like, that's a super corny example, but it's like, this whole my life is good enough concept is trash. Our ancestors regardless of where they were at in a caste system, they were always trying to do better, to be better, to have more. This whole, oh, I just got to be happy with what I have. That is a foreign concept. That is a Christian concept. It is not greedy to want to better the standard of living for yourself and your family. I'm not saying that there is not a level of greed that can get reached, but when you're not doing bloat, it's not only that you are not getting the blessings to make things better. You're also leaving yourself more vulnerable to the negatives in this world. And I would argue with the way things are going, especially these days, I would rather have as much backing and security as I can in the physical and spiritual realms. Just saying.
Right. And I would point out at something even of greater significance, that whether or not an individual's life may be okay, is our community okay? I mean, we're living in a day and age of where violence is everywhere. We're living in a day of age where people have no respect, people have no honor. We're living in a day and age where our own folk no longer even, for the most part, recognize that they are even an ethnic identity. They have no concept of it. It's been whitewashed from many, many people's minds. And we see this. We see the state that we're living in.
Well, it's so messed up that half of the people that do recognize it as an ethnic thing, they fight against their own people.
True. That's very true.
They demean, degrade their own people, their own folk, for no other reason than being of their folk.
Right. No, I agree with you. But just in general, though, the state of our folk, the state of our people, is in bad shape. And that's because we haven't been doing the communal bloats. That's because we haven't been restoring our connection to our gods and our folk. And we see where that path has taken us to the modern day age. This has been a transition and happening for close to 2,000 years now. Well, longer than that, 1,500 years or so, 1,700 years. But we see the destination where we're at this moment. But we can change that fate. We can make a choice to embrace our traditions and connect with our gods and protect our communities from these illnesses, from the poverty, from the misfortune, from transgression, from war. We can protect our communities by relying upon our God's help, and we get that help through our offerings to them. So I want to tie something else together in here, and I was listening to another podcast. Mark Perrier, the director of the Noriana Society, was the guest on the show, and he had brought up about the story of Rig, and it's something that I've heard a long time ago, and I've probably repeated it a couple times here and there over the years, but he reminded me of a story about Rig. And we have to remember, as I've stated in previous episodes, the lore is very layered. There's multiple levels of meaning and understanding in even single verses of things sometimes. But he was relaying about the story of Rig and how this is one of the greatest examples of bloat that we have, where you have essentially Rig showing up at the home of a couple and immediately receiving a gift or an offering of food. And that home was, shortly thereafter blessed with children. And then he goes to another home and is given an even better offering. And that home is also blessed with a child, but also a child that had other gifts with it. And then he goes to the third home and is given an even greater offering or gift. And that home is blessed the most with spiritual understanding. And I want to point this out because this is really important to understand. The effort that we put into the things that we do for our faith and our gods is going to be the rewards that we get in return. If we just do the bare minimum, our blessings and our help will be just a certain amount. And that the greater our efforts are, the greater that we strive to connect with our gods, the greater that our spiritual understanding will be, and the greater that connectedness will be.
As with every other aspect of life, you will get back from the gods what you give to the gods. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean if you give them $1 million, you're going to get $1 million. But you're only going to get out of it what you put into it. So the more thought, time, effort you put into your offerings, not just at Bloat, but even in living your day-to-day lives, you're going to start reaping the helps and the protections of the gods and of the ancestors more and more. And don't compare yourself to the next person. Like you know what you're going to be able to do or give. So just if somebody else next to you is doing better and are able to give more, don't hate them and don't look at what you have as being less than. Just give what you can and always be seeking to better your station, to give more and to receive more. Because the gods are also only going to give you what you can handle. They're not going to give me $1 million because it'll be gone tomorrow and who knows what's going to happen.
Snorting cocaine off of hookers' asses in Las Vegas would probably happen. I'm assuming.
Look, if I'm going to Vegas with $1 million, you and the other two are coming with me, and who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah. But I want to tie this back to our first part of this episode where we started talking about fate and Wyrd too, because this is another example of how our fates can change, where by not getting the help of the gods through the sacred act of Blot, we are affected by the curses of the Jotun. We are affected by their diseases. We are affected by their sicknesses. We're infected by infertility. And we can talk about statistics in the modern populations, and our folk are one of the fastest declining ethnic groups in the world. We are not at our healthiest moment in today's age. And that's because we have strayed very far from our gods. There's a lot of reasons behind it. But our fates can change when we connect to the gods. Now, one thing to mention is I don't believe that we can change some events, as I've mentioned throughout this podcast. And we have to bring up about the death of Balder and how the gods sought to do everything they could to prevent the death of Balder from happening, even to bring him back from hell after his death. Yet, and Wyrd said this is something that just can't be done. So there are certain things that are certainly predetermined to happen in the course of the universe events, in the course of our lives. But they're woven from the very moments of this universe's existence, the Urlag, the memory of the universe. And we talked in season 1 about how understanding the cycles of life and death, even not just on the human level, but the universal level, the collapse and the Big Bang and such, there's a memory that builds. And this memory dictates exactly how the water of the springs will flow. So, I don't know. That's my thoughts on this topic. That's my thoughts on it. You have more to add to it, Anthony?
The only thing that I want to add is just what, again, using Baldur's death. The gods tried everything they could to prevent it. The god tried to bring him back. This event was set. These events were set in stone, but they still tried. And I think that's another big thing that gets overlooked is whatever situation choice is in front of you, whatever outcome you desire, you still have to try. You still got to put in effort to make it happen, because you don't know if it can happen until you try to make it happen. You know, like,
Choose your fate.
Yes, like because it's super easy to just say, "Oh, I can't." So, a personal example, I would eventually like to own my own business. I don't know what that is yet. I haven't figured out the specifics, but it would be super easy for me to say, "Oh, no one in my family has ever owned a business. I come from a single parent household and a bunch of bad decisions when I was younger. So there's no way that I can do it. And it's just not in the cards." Or I can do what I'm doing now, and I have gotten myself into a job where I have a leadership position to learn how to manage people. I have a stable house life, a home, vehicles. I've got extra money coming in now, and we're starting to save. So I'm doing the things that I can do to try to make owning a business a reality for me. It could never happen, but I was never going to know, and I'm not going to know until I start doing things to try to make that happen.
There's so many of us, especially when we look at our situation globally as a folk, that many of us aren't. We're just, intellectually masturbating, as I've said in previous episodes. We like the ideas, the concepts. We share this common, idea, but very few people are actually picking up the sword. Very few people are actually picking up and moving forward to fight through the fray, to make a destiny of greatness, not just for the folk as a whole, but even for themselves on the individual level. And I would argue the only way that we can do that is by connecting to our gods, goddesses, and our ancestors.
And looking back on how my life has changed since I embraced our folk ways, especially once I figured out the true understanding of our folk ways, I still struggle. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying life is perfect. I'm not saying I'm perfect. But the trajectory and everything else and all the good stuff has multiplied while the bad has dwindled down. Like, for the most part, things are easier. But when they get hard, gotta grit my teeth and knuckle up. But I love it. That's my element.
And I think you're doing a good job, brother. I think you're doing a good job. So, we don't have much time left with this episode, but I did want to tie something in here a little bit because I think it's important. When I had mentioned the Dan Cap podcast off the Fergan, the episode where he was talking about Wyrd, I think it's a really good episode. Would recommend people to go listen to it. One of the things he kept saying was he uses the word worth. And this is an Anglo-Saxon concept. It comes off the old Germanic warrior concepts of honor and loyalty and the worth of an individual, the worth or the value of that person, and how it was attached to his Jarl or attached to the king in later times. But that word worth, what they're really implying is the value of the individual. And that's because actually the word honor did not exist for the Anglo-Saxons, at least not by term itself in that way. It was something that was understood through one's worth and one's loyalty. The word honor is a Latin derivative word. It came from Rome through France into the Anglo-Saxon lexicon in about 1100 in the Christian era. But I really value that concept because our worth, our value can be so much more when we attach that to our gods, when we attach that to our folk. Our value increases, our worth increases. And we have to remember that word worth itself is the same word for the word worthy. And at the end of the day, we all shall die as the cattle do. And the only thing that will be left will be our worth. It will be our value that we've left. And that is what the gods will judge us upon. That will be the litmus of our worthiness to sit among our kin and folk.
This has been The Sacred Stew. I am Anthony. My co-host is James. Y'all have a good night.